Hello, this is Bentv News Roundup, a compilation of major stories in the week ending. I'm Tunde Alabi. Thank you for being part of the program today. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has told Prime Minister Theresa May to put on hold the rollout of universal credit as more people are currently struggling with the cost of living. Reacting to the call, the Prime Minister stated that universal credit is a simpler system designed to help people get into workplace.
It is good news that more people are in work. It is good news that the unemployment rate is at its lowest level for over 40 years. That does mean more money being taken in wages by people to their families. And he asks about the cost of living, and I'll tell him what we've done in relation to the cost of living. 30 million people have been given a tax cut that's worth £1,000 to a basic rate taxpayer every year. We have given the low paid, through the national living wage, the highest pay increase for 20 years. And for those who take the full entitlement, doubling free childcare is worth £5,000 per child per year to every family. That's what we're doing to help people with the cost of living.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the Prime Minister could do a first and answer a question. The question I asked her was about falling wages. And this week, Mr. Speaker, Christine, a worker in a village shop, wrote to me saying this: "I am worse off. I cannot afford to keep my car, which I struggle to buy, on the road. I need my car to attend appointments, job hunt for a better position, and take my son to activities." We don't have a luxurious lifestyle, and we don't want one. We just want to feel secure. Mr. Speaker, when millions of workers are having to rely on the benefit system just to make ends meet, isn't that a sign not of a strong economy, but of a weak economy?
Minister.
I recognise that, like Christine, there are people in this country who are finding life difficult. I have recognised that since I came into this role. But that is why it is so important that government takes steps to help people with the cost of living, with the costs that they find themselves facing week in and week out. It's why the measures that I've just listed to the right honourable gentleman in tax cuts and national living wage are important. It's why it's important, for example, we've frozen fuel duty. We've ensured that we've taken some people who are the lowest paid out of paying income tax altogether. We are going to introduce an energy price cap. This is all about helping people with... It's all about helping people with the cost of living. But you can only do that if you have a strong economy, and you only get a strong economy with a Conservative government.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Mr. Speaker, people struggling to make ends meet, private sector rental evictions up, wages down, universal credit in a shambles. Is Christine wrong, or is she just an example of what it's like living in modern Britain? Mr. Speaker, last week I asked the Prime Minister to scrap the unfair charges on the Universal Credit Helpline. Today she's finally bowed to that pressure. But the fundamental problems of universal credit remain. The 6-week wait, rising indebtedness, rent arrears and evictions. Will the Prime Minister now pause universal credit and fix the problems before pressing ahead with the rollout?
Prime Minister.
Yes, it is absolutely right. Listen to the sentence.
Send to the honourable member for Brent Central before she's an aspiring stateswoman and must conduct herself with due decorum. Calm. Again, maybe the honourable lady is another member who should take up yoga. The Prime Minister.
I suggest to honourable members opposite that they listen to the whole sentence that I was going to make. Yes, it is absolutely right that we have announced this morning that we are going to change in relation to the telephone charge that is made on people here. I said last week that we were listening to a number of proposals that have been made. We have done that. And it's also, I think it's right to have done this now because there's a lot of emphasis, a lot of publicity around universal credit at the moment. I want people to know that they can ring in, that they can get their advice, and that they can do that without being worried about it. And that's exactly what we're going to do. But the right honourable gentleman talks about universal credit and talks about pausing universal credit. Why have we introduced universal credit? It's a simpler system. It's a system that encourages people to get into the workplace. It is a system that is working because more people are getting into work. And pausing universal credit won't help those people who will be helped by going to universal credit, getting into the workplace and bringing home more pay for their families.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, there is a very long list of people urging the Prime Minister to pause universal credit, including the Citizens Advice Bureau, the Trussell Trust, John Major, and, I understand, 24 of our own backbenchers. Well, they've got a chance this afternoon. They can vote to pause universal credit and show that they are representing their constituents. The public sector pay cap, Mr. Speaker, is causing real suffering and real staff shortages. Last week, the Health Secretary announced the NHS pay cap was scrapped. But when asked if the NHS is going to get extra money to fund any agreed pay rise, he replied, "That is something I can't answer right now." Well, this is right now. The Prime Minister is here right now. How about an answer right now?
Prime Minister.
As I have explained to the right honourable gentleman and the House in the past, the way in which we approach the whole question of public sector pay is through the work of the pay review bodies. They have all reported for this current year. They did that against the remit that was set by government of a blanket cap of 1% in relation to public sector pay. For the 2018-19 year, we have changed that remit. What we have done is to ensure that there is flexibility in the system for that period. But perhaps I could just explain something else to the right honourable gentleman, because I fear that for all his years in Parliament, there is one thing that he has failed to recognise. Government has no money of its own. Government gets money.
Mr. McNeill, you're becoming overexcitable again, young man. Calm yourself. No need for excessive gesticulation. It serves no useful purpose whatsoever. Let's hear the Prime Minister's reply. Prime Minister will be heard, however long it takes. Prime Minister.
Government has no money of its own. It collects money in taxes from businesses and people to pay, to spend on the NHS and on the services that people need. If businesses aren't being set up, if businesses aren't growing, if people aren't in work, government doesn't have the money to spend on NHS pay, on schools and hospitals. And, of course, the only way you ensure those businesses are growing, the only way you ensure that people are in jobs, that government has the money to spend on schools and hospitals and NHS pay, is with a Conservative government.
Jeremy Corbyn.
The Prime Minister seemed to have no problem finding £1 billion in a couple of days for the DUP. She needs to make it clear. She needs to make it clear, Mr. Speaker, to the NHS workers what pay rise is being offered, when they will receive it, and what funding is being provided, and what cuts she's proposing to make elsewhere in order to deal with that. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, young people are in record levels of debt. Yeah. This week, the Financial Conduct Authority warned, and I quote, of a pronounced build-up of indebtedness amongst a younger age group to fund essential living costs. Isn't this yet another sign, not of a strong economy, but of a weak economy?
Prime Minister.
This is, I have to say to the Right Honourable Gentleman, we have heard from the OECD that the deficit that the Labour government left us was unsustainable. Since then, we have indeed found money for the people of Northern Ireland. We've also found, as I was explaining earlier, £20 billion to give a tax cut to 30 million people and £38 billion to freeze fuel duty. That's about helping ordinary working people day in and day out. And when it comes to students and young people and their fear about debt, there's one thing we know, and that is we shouldn't be racking up debts today like Labour proposed that those young people would have to pay off tomorrow.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Mr. Speaker, it's very interesting that she talks about what happened 10 years ago. Her former friend George Osborne said earlier this week, did Gordon Brown cause the subprime crisis in America? No. He went on to say, broadly speaking, the government did what was necessary in a very difficult situation. Mr. Speaker, Under this Prime Minister, we have a weak economy. Yeah. UK growth is currently the worst amongst the 10 largest EU economies. We're the only major economy where wages are lower today than they were 10 years ago, even without the risks posed by this government's bungled Brexit negotiations. It's very interesting the Home Secretary is necessary to keep the two protagonists apart. Mr. Speaker, we now have weak growth, falling productivity, falling investment, falling wages. How does the Prime Minister have the nerve to come here and talk about a strong economy when the figures show the exact opposite?
U.S. President Donald Trump has denied the comments attributed to him during a telephone conversation with the widow of one of the 4 soldiers killed in Niger. U.S. Congresswoman Frederica Wilson accused Mr. Trump of making insensitive comments during his telephone conversation with the wife of Army Sergeant David Johnson.
Florida Congresswoman Frederica Wilson says she was in the car with Johnson's pregnant widow when she received Trump's call, and that she overheard the president saying he knew what he signed up for, but when it happens, it hurts anyway.
You don't tell a grieving widow that her husband signed up to die.
Trump denied Wednesday that those were his words.
Didn't say what that congresswoman said, didn't say it at all. She knows it, and she now is not saying it. I did not say what she said, and I'd like her to make the statement again.
But Wilson stood by her original accounting.
Let him bring a transcript. I was not the only person in the car. There's no reason to lie about a telephone call.
Johnson's mother confirmed the Congresswoman's account of the conversation to the Washington Post. The White House said Wednesday there is no transcript, but that Chief of Staff John Kelly was present during the call and thought it was appropriate.
He thought the call was respectful, and he thought that the president did the best job he could under those circumstances to offer condolences on behalf of the country.
Trump has been criticized for taking too long to address the loss of the soldiers killed in Niger. He has defended himself by criticizing his predecessors.
If you look at President Obama and other presidents, most of them didn't make calls. A lot of them didn't make calls. I like to call when it's appropriate, when I think I'm able to do it.
When the aides of former presidents disputed the statement, Trump suggested in a television interview that President Obama had not called Kelly when his son was killed in Afghanistan in 2010. Kelly did not comment, but it has been reported that he and his wife attended a breakfast for Gold Star families at the White House in 2011 and was seated at the First Lady's table. President Trump has touted the importance of the U.S. military and has backed increasing the military spending, but his response to the soldiers' deaths has sparked a barrage of criticism.
Rohingya refugees in the U.S. are seeking U.S. government intervention in dealing with the humanitarian crisis confronting Muslim Rohingya who have fled Myanmar to neighboring Bangladesh.
After arriving in Chicago in 2012, Rohingya refugee Abdul Jabbar Amanullah had regular contact with his family in Rakhine State. But the latest news from Myanmar is troubling.
They're telling me that the current situation is very worse because of the military surround, that they are not able to move anywhere.
The last contact with anyone in his village was this video, showing it burning to the ground.
We don't know who set fires. In my village, the houses burning down.
Amanullah suspects it was the military or groups aligned with them. Myanmar officials blame arsonists and say the problems are being exaggerated. It's difficult to determine the truth because officials restrict access for journalists and aid workers. But those fleeing the area tell a consistent story.
What he's saying is people have been killed, the roads have been closed, the mosques have been burned, the houses have been burned, the women have been raped, and even anybody who's educated or a leader of the community has been killed, and there's nothing to eat.
Dr. Imran Akbar just returned to Chicago after visiting the camps in Bangladesh, holding hundreds of thousands of Rohingya refugees.
The lines are a mile long waiting for food distribution, and it rains there every day. So with that, there's constant mud and sludge, and a lot of times impassable conditions for vehicles. Couple that with not having proper sanitation and not having, adequate latrines and so forth, it creates, the perfect environment for cholera and other infectious diseases.
Armed with pictures and first-hand video accounts, Akbar is appealing to U.S. lawmakers for assistance. He spoke with Senator Dick Durbin at the Rohingya Cultural Center in Chicago.
What we know is this: there is an ethnic cleansing taking place in Myanmar today.
Durbin wants to immediately end military-to-military contacts with Myanmar.
They should allow UN observers in immediately to see all of the territory in Myanmar currently occupied by the Rohingya people. There is no excuse for that. And until they allow that to happen, there is no reason the United States should send them aid.
As he waits further word from his village, Abdul Jabbar Amanullah hopes whatever action the U.S. government takes.
How big is your village? How many people?
We have more than 200 families.
Isn't too late to help his family.
The military is still doing the same thing that they did before, set fire, killing the Rohingyas. So our first target is to stop this kind of stuff. That is my hope to the Senator Durbin. He can raise his voice, he can tell to the Congress and also our president to take immediate action on the Burmese government.
Action he hopes will ultimately lead to the end of a still unfolding humanitarian crisis that has already forced more than 500,000 people from their homes.
Nigeria's Deputy Chief of Mission and Permanent Observer Organization of American States at the Embassy of Nigeria in the United States of America, Ambassador Hassan Mohammed Hassan, has reiterated the commitment of the government of Nigeria to the protection and defense of all Nigerians in America. The ambassador stated that the embassy will continue to defend the rights of every Nigerian who acts within the law of the U.S.
If you break their rules, they believe in their rules. You break their rules, you don't have valid documents, immigration issues, and so many other things, traffic, child molestation, so many things they don't like. So if you are in a country, in one's country, you have to behave very well. If you behave abnormally, you are going to be caught by the law. So in that situation, we can't say you break the law because you are Nigerian, you are not supposed to be jailed, or you are not supposed to be tried, or you are not supposed to be convicted. We don't have that authority. But if on our investigations we found out that you don't deserve the treatment that have been meted out to you, we can intervene. But our scope of intervention rests with the extent to which you commit the crime. Because even Americans themselves, they are taking their people to jail. Americans are being sent to the gallows. So as a foreigner in Nigeria, you break our law, you have to pay. Basically, there were no challenges other than things that are normal in an embassy. You have the funding is not adequate. The local staff are getting a bit truant because of non-payment of allowances. And now we have surmounted that. So, and that would be, I think, can be attributed to when we were in recession. Things were not going normally, but now we've come out of the recession and things have started picking up. So the mission is doing, to a great extent, I can say, very well. There are things that, as human beings, we will expect them to be beyond what they are. But on a general note, we are very okay.
In other missions, they have problems with passports. Do you have such problems, sir?
We don't have problems with passport. I know what happened in the past. Of course, I told you the recession impacted on almost everything, every aspect of our work. And the issuance of passport basically is not the work of foreign affairs, but the work of immigration.
A new report in South Africa has linked North Korea to illegal wildlife trade in Africa. The report noted a rise in Pyongyang's trafficking of illegal wildlife from Angola, Mozambique, South Africa, and the Democratic Republic of Congo.
North Korea finds itself increasingly squeezed by U.S. and international sanctions imposed to try to stop the nation's nuclear weapon and ballistic missile programs. The hermit nation has long found creative ways to bring in cash, often through smuggling under the cover of diplomacy. But one source of illicit income hits an especially vulnerable group: Africa's endangered wildlife. Africa's rhino and elephant populations are already at dire levels, motivated by the Asian market's growing demand. In 2015, South Africa expelled a North Korean diplomat arrested in Mozambique with 4.5 kilograms of rhino horn and $100,000 in cash. It was not an isolated incident. More than half of the diplomats arrested for smuggling rhino horn and ivory over the last 3 decades have been North Korean, according to a new report by South African researcher Julian Rademeyer.
I find it very hard to believe that they're operating completely alone, that they are not being sanctioned in some way by the regime, or at least by their superiors. North Korean embassies, by their very nature, are quite strictly controlled. People cannot move very easily and freely.
African nations have been reluctant to challenge their ties with a nation that supported them in their post-independence struggles, and that, because of its trade restrictions, is in a position to offer good deals.
If a country like North Korea comes along and offers a relatively good deal on refined petroleum, for instance, which is one of their main exports to Africa, it's understandable that African governments may not ask a lot of questions about where that petroleum comes from in the face of all these massive pressures on service delivery.
Rademeyer says the laws do exist to stop illegal trade by diplomats, but the will is often absent.
Law enforcement officials are unlikely to want to stop diplomats. Governments don't want to become involved in diplomatic incidents. Governments with close ties to North Korea don't particularly want to inflame tensions. But the Vienna Convention does allow for cases where there is evidence or there is a compelling case to be made that illegal items are being smuggled, to search those bags and take action.
VOA contacted the North Korean embassy here in Pretoria, requesting a response to the allegations made in the report. However, embassy officials did not respond to our request for an interview.
And with our report, we conclude the news roundup for this week. Thank you for being part of the program. I am Tunde Alabi. Enjoy the rest of your week. Bye. As part of our continued efforts to reach the African and other ethnic communities in the United Kingdom with greater impacts and create the platform to hear your silent and unheard views in this hugely growing community in the United Kingdom, our channel, Bentv, presents to you another live current affairs television program. Our focus on the program is to review and discuss issues around the diaspora community in the UK. The program offers you the unrestricted voice on issues affecting you in the UK. Join us live every Monday at 10 a.m. to 12 noon. Another business segment of Dialogue in Diaspora, 2 to 3 p.m. every Monday. But guess what? You know you can be part of the program. Just send us an email at bentelevisionuk@gmail.com. Dialogue in Diaspora, your voice, your opinion on RTV.